Welcome to the High Existence Podcast, where we challenge the way you live. We bring you the wisdom and tools to help you grow into a more enlightened version of yourself. Join us by taking the Ultimate Life Experiment, our 30 Challenges to Enlightenment course, a complete spiritual path to help you overcome the limitations of your mind and to embody the highest philosophical realizations. Use the code WISDOM at checkout to get a huge 25% off the course, available only to podcast subscribers at store.highexistence.com. I'm your host, John Waterlow. You can find me over on High Existence and on my own podcast, Voices in the Dark. Baba Brinkman is a Canadian rap artist with an incredible back catalogue, including the Rap Guide to Climate Chaos, the Rap Guide to Evolution, to Human Nature, to Medicine, and to Religion. And now we sat down to talk principally about his new one, the Rap Guide to Consciousness. As the titles imply, this is someone who is a communicator using rap as the means of connecting. He's a bridge between the academic worlds of serious research and the rest of the world. As he puts it, he's the world's only peer-reviewed rapper. He's been a literary ambassador for Cambridge University after they heard his first show, The Rap Guide to the Canterbury Tales. And he argues that rap can be a vehicle not only for education, but even for raising your consciousness. We get into a lot of social issues, human psychology, the nature of where humanity is going in future. I saw Baba's show at the Edinburgh International Festival and was completely blown away. So I grabbed him after the show and he agreed to sit down and share his thoughts and talk about how you create art as a means of education. This was a great, exciting interview, which I'm sure you're going to love. We also have included a couple of tracks that Baba gave us from the Rap Guide to Consciousness. The first you'll hear in just a second, called Good Bayesian. Listen to those words, believe me. And at the end, there's cephalophile, if I'm saying that right, which describes a meeting that he had with an octopus in an aquarium whilst tripping heavily on mushrooms. This is really a special one. Enjoy.
We don't just passively perceive the world, we actively generate it. So perception, figuring out what's there, has to be a process of informed guesswork in which the brain combines these sensory signals with its prior expectations or beliefs about the way the world is. The world we experience comes as much, if not more, from the inside out as from the outside in.
Let me show you how to be a good Bayesian. Change your predictions after taking information in. And if you're thinking I'll be less than amazing, let's adjust those expectations. What's a Bayesian? It's someone who cares about evidence and doesn't jump to assumptions based on intuitions and prejudice. A Bayesian makes predictions on the best available info and adjusts the probability, cause every belief is provisional. And when I kick a flow, mostly I'm watching eyes widen, maybe cause my likeness lowers expectations of tight rhyming. How would I know unless I'm rhyming in front of a bunch of blind men dropping placebo-controlled science like I'm Richard Feynman? Is it because of my looks or the fact that I talk like I'm mad for books? Either way, in the ecosystem of rap, I'm the platypus, so my patron saint on stage is Reverend Bays. Just watch me update the predictions in everyone's brains, teaching a crowd about probabilistical statistical science. For instance, if the president's a proving degenerate liar, remember your priors and be skeptical whenever he's testifying. Is it always inaccurate? No, but you discount outliers, especially when he's testifying about non-citizens, Muslims, African Americans, and other victims of dog whistling, bigoted, unconscious bias, unreliable information. The antidote is to learn how to think like a Bayesian. So let me show you how to be a good Bayesian. Change your predictions after taking information in. And if you're thinking I'll be less than amazing, let's adjust those expectations. Let me show you how to be a good Bayesian. Change calculations after taking fresh data in. Those predictions that your brain is making, let's get them on a solid foundation.
It was 2009 and I was opening for Nas. Predicted they would love us, hypothesis was wrong. Crowd presented evidence, booing while I rhymed. They'd rather hear the message or New York state of mind. Was it my flow? No, I hardly lacked ability. Rapping with agility, check the probability. Not likely to give up under fierce choleric scrutiny. Refused to stop the show, though their peer review was news to me. Confusing me like the anti-science right. I was dripping like the ice caps, yes it was not my night. but I kept it Bayesian, cause the lane I'm in is solid. Anticipate results with my a priori knowledge. So never let a hater shower you with data that tells you you should quit. Drop the mic and be like later. 2 more songs, then like OJ, I was out. Saw Nas backstage and thanked him, grabbed my bag, and then I bounced.
Let me show you how to be a good Bayesian. Change your predictions after taking information. And if you're thinking I'll be less than amazing, let's adjust those expectations. Let me show you how to be a good Bayesian. Change calculations after taking fresh data in. Those predictions that your brain is making, let's get them on a solid foundation.
Felt like I was still a baby when I first learned to be a Bayesian. I would find myself within a constant state of frustration before the day begins. On Facebook, my sample consisted of people I called my friends, who self-aggrandize and post constantly aligned with the latest trends, using inconclusive evidence to assess the probability that people would never examine what is true and accept a lie willingly. From my observation came a question: are people really so naive? Or is there a correlation between make-believe and what is on the screen? Cause it seems that we have forgotten this. The truth and politics are opposites. Humans are intelligent, and that's the layup of a hypothesis. So I would conduct an experiment by laying down a simple rap and wondering would every one of the people who heard this line call it fact, even if it were verifiable, supportable, sustainable, considering the source. When anyone asks how the info is attainable, so I analyzed my data, the context in which I framed it in. 50% would agree with me, taking the info I gave to them. Maybe if I was the platinum pop star rocking football stadiums, and not a little known rap artist whose status strictly subterranean, I can conclude they would place a higher value on the power of my cranium. But minds are forever changing them, and that, my friends, is Bayesian.
So let me show you how to be a good Bayesian. Change your predictions after taking information in. And if you're thinking I'll be less than amazing, let's adjust those expectations. Let me show you how to be a good Bayesian. Change calculations after taking fresh data in. Those predictions that your brain is making, let's get them on a solid foundation.
So I am sitting with Baba Brinkman in an extremely English scene. It's slightly raining. We're on a little balcony and we've got umbrellas ready. But neither of us are from here. I saw you up in Edinburgh at the Edinburgh Festival Fringe with the Rap Guide to Consciousness, your new album, which probably is out at the point that we're going to have this podcast out. I'm definitely going to get into that. But first, I was interested in Edinburgh and your career, because I've heard you talk about it a bunch as a key place for you in developing your work. And what does Edinburgh mean to you, and how was it this time?
Well, Edinburgh is the place that first told me that what I do is possible and sustainable, and people will have a positive reaction to it. Mm-hmm. So I finished a master's in medieval literature in 2003, and while I was working on the master's thesis, I was also working on rap adaptations of Chaucer's Canterbury Tales.
Yes, of course you were.
Because that's what you do if you're an aspiring young literary rapper with no street cred. So you find somebody to appropriate. So I was trying to figure out what to do with these. You know, I had like a 45-minute show that was a collection of the Knight's Tale, the Miller's Tale, the Wife of Bath's Tale, and I would meet people and say, like, I've been doing these rap Canterbury Tales, but I'm not really sure where to go with them next. And everyone would say, take it to the Fringe.
Yeah.
They'll take anything. And I think, you know, that's one of the glories of Edinburgh, is that you can bring anything there and give it a try. So I signed up for the 2004 Fringe with no idea what to expect, having done virtually no research about the size or the scope or what it's like. I had just, you know,
I think it's in the region of like 4,000 shows at this point. It's enormous.
I think it was 1,800 when I went there the first time, which stunned me when I first got there. I didn't realize it was going to be so competitive. I thought like getting in would mean you were automatically given a big platform and audience. But no, yeah, hustle on the street corner kind of thing. Mm-hmm. But I got a 5-star review from the Scotsman unexpectedly and very welcomely, and sold out my entire run. And then Cambridge University reached out to me a few months later and said, we've read about your Rap Canterbury Tales show. We love the reviews. Would you be interested in being hired by Cambridge to be a literary ambassador to schools to get young people excited about studying literature? And I was like, that's the coolest job ever. I'm sign me up. So then I ended up doing like a 16 school tour with a chaperone from the Cambridge English department the following spring, which was, got to see all over the country, north, south, everywhere. And, it kind of just launched what I'm doing, because it gave me the confidence and, got to trial and error the stuff in front of crowds, and always have that review to be like 5 stars in the Scotsman, check me out.
Yeah, we reach for our umbrellas as London gets serious with us. So intellectual rap. So you're the only peer-reviewed rapper out there. Do you think that rap is... What is it about rap that is good for teaching? Because it seems like students and teachers really love what you're doing, but it's not the thing I think most people would think of as a kind of medium in which to communicate quite complex things.
Yeah, I think that's partially a kind of optical illusion created by the content of most mainstream commercial rap, which doesn't usually try to teach, and if it did, it probably wouldn't be mainstream commercial rap. But the culture in general has had pretty intellectual storytelling, complex lyricism since way back. I mean, like this second or third big rap song that came out with the message, and that's social commentary and, critiques of inequality and poetry and all that. So, I was influenced by the more literary of the rappers, the sort of Nas, Talib Kweli, the ones that you'd call like poets and storytellers. And I think the reason rap works so well as education is because it works well as entertainment and audience engagement. So rappers have sort of evolved the tools to grab the attention of a crowd and thrill them, because it's survival of the fittest out there on stage. Yeah. And if you're not wowing the crowd, then someone's going to step up and do it for you. So because rap got so good at all these tricks of sort of like striking wordplay and metaphors and punchlines and the sort of syncopated lyricism, rhythmic stuff that crowds go, damn, how did he do that? Freestyle, obviously, hype the crowd, call and response, like just kind of whipping people into a collective frenzy. That all those tricks that rappers use to rock a party, if you plug in intellectual content, you get comedy value and memorability for your buck. And I mean, rhyme's always been a mnemonic device. Yeah. Right? You get that hook stuck in your head, and whatever the content that's locked into it will come back quite easily.
One of the hardest things is getting people's attention these days, even more so because there's so much stuff going on. So I can see how if you're using a form which is immediately arresting for people and you can bring them in. Elsewhere I saw you had said you wanted to reach people with art rather than argument, which really stuck with me. But do you think, are those exclusive? Are they mutually exclusive? And why does art hit home better, perhaps, than argument?
Well, I think art is designed to make an emotional connection, and it bypasses some of the filters that rationality relies on. So I think, if people are thrilled and laughing and having fun, there can be an argument in there that they're more receptive to. I mean, in a way, this is a very propagandistic way of describing it, isn't it? Yeah. But I believe in the message of scientific literacy and historical literacy and literary literacy. I think those are all good things to get across, and I think they're all things that academics struggle to get across. Not all. There's some very good communicators out there, but I think I'm partially driven by this feeling that there is just really relevant and important and fascinating content coming out of scientific and academic research, and people feel like there's some barrier to comprehension, like it's too complex or it's too boring or it's too difficult, and rap can be that bridge that makes them go, I think I get it now. But it's just, those tools already existed. It's just about finding the points of intersection that make them make sense to each other.
And were you the kind of the first person doing this? Because I mean, there's, like you've mentioned, there's storytelling and social commentary in a lot of hip hop already. Who sort of, from the intellectual perspective, in both academia or like in the stuff that you've read and over in the world of hip hop, have been most kind of influential, or do you feel you kind of took a lead from?
Well, I was reading like Stephen Greenblatt is a good literary communicator. I was reading, I don't know, there's not really superstars in the, because I come from a humanities and literature world. I'm trying to think of like, who's the Richard Dawkins of communicating English literature? Stephen Greenblatt's name comes to mind first. I just read his book, The Swerve. I thought it was excellent, sort of like detective story work about Lucretius de Rerum Natura and how it came into the modern literary canon and stuff. So, I mean, I was reading him when I was a college student as well, and wanted to communicate that kind of thrill. And with science, there's lots, right? Steven Pinker, Dan Dennett, Richard Dawkins, David Sloan Wilson, E.O. Wilson.
I guess
Jeffrey Miller.
In the literary field, it tends to be that the superstars are superstars because they're also really political, like people like Terry Eagleton or those who got a strong, maybe Marxist agenda most prominently.
Yeah.
So it's not just the content of the work; they're also trying to make a big social point. But then I guess so are you.
Yeah, I don't have as clear of a political agenda, I guess, as someone who would claim Marxist or claim libertarian, or you know what I mean. I'm kind of centrist, so I kind of see myself as like wanting to put across good ideas. I was going to say from the left and right of the spectrum, but I think they're mostly center left. And that's to me seems to me where the most of the good ideas come. There's some center right ones. Far right ones are repugnant, and far left ones sometimes counterproductive, let's say. But yeah, I think, I mean, my political agenda is sort of humanistic, I'd say, like find the path to the greatest thriving for the greatest number in terms of human well-being. And sometimes there's good solutions from science that could be put into effect via politics and public policy. And people think science is, either belongs in a separate silo as social science and politics, or is too complex to apply and really work. And so yeah, I like evolution for that, because human nature and economics and just human behavior has a strong evolutionary component. So if you understand the dynamics of the sort of game theory aspects of evolutionary biology and how it works, then you can make better predictions about how people will behave in certain circumstances, and you can design circumstances to help them behave better.
And then that ties back into the culture, right? Because then the behavior then defines the culture or the sociology.
Yeah.
And rap fits into that too. Or I heard you talk about this and say the rap is also an example of evolution, which I really liked. Could you sort of flesh that out a bit as well?
Well, I think it's evolution on two platforms simultaneously. So I think rappers display a lot of species-typical behaviors, let's say, in terms of like status seeking and like mate attracting and rival intimidating and lots of things that humans do in general. I think rappers have sort of developed a culture of unapologetic celebration of this is who I am. Only God can judge me, so bite me kind of mentality.
Yeah, so bite me on the end of it.
Yeah. So, I think like some people would say that rap is shallow and materialistic, and I say maybe it's more honest.
Maybe people are shallow and materialistic.
Exactly, and they just pretend they're not. Or in certain circumstances, people tend to revert to those kinds of behaviors, or maybe like when the opportunity is available, people are as materialistic as they can get away with being a lot of the time. Not always, obviously. I think there's a strong evolutionary altruism component to it as well, and I think rap also displays that, like crews and cliques, and like who are you willing to be loyal to and back up, and also a lot of rappers, their entire like ethos is about having a social conscience and uplifting the community and not being parasitic by, for instance, being a drug dealer and selling drugs to the community. No, we're going to try to like build something that has long-term value instead of living for the moment. So there's sort of like interesting tensions within rap between gangster rap, which is all live for the moment and like damn the consequences, which I think a lot of people can relate to when they're in a certain mind state. And also, like, no, restrain yourself, like, think of for the long term, and you will, in the long run, be happier for it and more fulfilled. And what those are really about are time horizons. Different organisms build towards either short-term or long-term goals depending on their prospects. And if you're likely to die soon, it actually makes way more rational sense to live for the moment on a lot of different fronts, whether that's being violent to get what you can, or like being carefree about who you mate with, or you know what I'm saying, like the sort of short time horizon mentality, which is played out across human ages, is not a race thing at all, right? Rappers just found like a really potent way of explaining it, but it's a total universal. Human beings in certain contexts behave a certain way, and rap can tell you all about how that works and feels in very articulate terms. But you know, so can, I don't know, Akira Kurosawa movies.
Yeah.
So, like, pick your poison, you know. But I just really relate to rappers as the sort of narrators of that experience. Not that I can be a narrator of that experience, because I come from a much more safe environment where people were constantly being told, plan for the future and build towards long-term goals. And that didn't sound like a sucker's deal. It actually looked like the people that were the highest status in my environment growing up were the people that made the smartest decisions, not the gangsters.
And then in the kind of rap that you're doing, it is a totally different time frame, because if you're talking about climate change and you're talking about social psychology and understanding the self, that seems like the other end of the spectrum.
Yeah, well, the time horizons on climate change are much longer, but the challenge of appealing to people when their instincts lean towards instant gratification is the same. You know, so the social conscience rappers saying don't sell drugs, you should instead think about building something that's worthwhile for the community, start a business, go back to school, you know, think about more than just yourself and your clique. That's actually a very similar argument to transition to renewable energy. Don't just burn all these fossil fuels and enrich yourself in your gated community right now, because the long-term consequences are going to be worse off for everyone, including you. You know, depending on how strong your bunker is. So I find that when I look at social problems, especially ones that have individuals pitted against their groups, or like various levels of self-interest playing out against each other, you can look to rap and you can hear the rappers explaining that at multiple levels. You know, like you can enrich yourself at the expense of your family or your neighborhood. You can enrich your neighborhood at the expense of the greater society. You know, and all those stories are being played out really articulately in rap. So I'm in no place to like speak as a gangster rapper, but I can speak on the phenomenon of gangster rap as a certain kind of game theory dynamic that is a familiar example to people. So the only gangster rap I would ever write would be via a persona that's making an argument about how human nature works, and I have put out a bunch of songs like that.
And have you had pushback? Because whilst you seem to be like really happily embraced by scientists and teachers and so on, what do fans and hip-hop artists, fans of hip-hop and hip-hop artists think about what you're doing, as far as you can tell?
I haven't really gotten a lot of backlash, but I think like the backlash would only come from people that completely lack a sense of irony.
Yeah,
because
that's often where backlash comes from.
It's so tongue-in-cheek, you know, like I'm in a way, I'm kind of trying to be Chaucerian all the way to the bottom. You know what I mean? Like I started with the Canterbury Tales, and like, okay, now I'll be a science communicator, and how many personas can I come up with that can explain scientific ideas via familiar seeming archetypes in our society? And then they're like, he thinks he's a gangster because he's waving his hands around and, you know, talking like a gangster in that rap video. You know, you can go find YouTube comments of people being like, look at this whack-ass white boy pretending to be black. Well, he clearly missed the point.
Yeah.
You know?
And because only black people wave their hands around.
How do you know if I'm imitating a black person, or if I'm imitating a white person, imitating an Asian person, imitating a Hispanic person, imitating a black person? And who was the black person imitating in the first place?
I said that's the question that was exactly on my mind at that moment. the meta levels of, I mean, it's an interesting question that keeps hitting my radar over and over about cultural appropriation. And people get so vexed and angry about it, as though culture isn't all appropriation and mixing of different elements.
Yeah.
Is that something that you think about as well?
I do, and it sort of waxes and wanes the degree to which people feel like being outraged about cultural appropriation is, you know, the thing to the new trend.
Yeah, it's cool to be outraged.
Yeah, and I don't want to be outright dismissive of it, because there are kind of crass appropriations that I think are actually unjust. Like if, a company comes in and tries to trademark something that's a traditional, like, indigenous artwork or something like that, and then profits off of it at the expense of the people that are doing it, I think that is something we should be vigilant against. But I don't think white people doing rap really counts as cultural appropriation, because black people have been selling rap to white people since rap started. And if you're going to sell things to people, you kind of need to accept the possibility of them emulating what you've sold them. You know what I mean? Like, and it's not, and also just framing it as black and white is so narrow, because like rap has been exported from New York to the rest of America. So all of America that's not New York culturally appropriated rap, and then, exported to everywhere else. And so, like, are the Japanese rappers culturally appropriating the African Americans? What about the Palestinian rappers? What about the, Polish or East Berliner rappers? I've just seen so many examples of rap around the world that I think the ability to relate to it so easily is why it's such a powerful universal art form. And if it's a universal art form, then there's universal participation possible. But I also don't think, it's not that there should be no standards in terms of like everything is rap that claims to be rap. I do think the culture has like a symbolic core, and I have sort of accepted as an artist the criteria that hip-hop culture appears to put on artists, which is that your race is not as important as the fact of doing your homework. You got to know where it comes from. You have to like put the work in to be good at it. If you're whack or if you're ignorant, then that's appropriation. But if you've got skills, or are at least like working hard to acquire skills, and have like paid attention to where the culture comes from, and you're not like, well, white people really invented rap, don't you know? Or some, you know what I mean? Like,
keep tracing it back.
Yeah, you got to know where it comes from. You got to like have experienced it, and that's I consider myself a hip hop head, and I paid attention to the various hip hop cultures I've interacted with. Vancouver, where I come from, New York, where I live now, the UK. I spent a lot of time in Brighton and collaborated with a whole bunch of rappers there. And there's a common ethic to sort of underground hip-hop culture that I've found around the world. There is a sort of common language that you learn to speak it, and you grab the mic and get on stage and show what you've got, and you can get respect for that. No one's going to call you out based on your race alone.
It sounds like another kind of peer review, sort of based on authenticity.
Absolutely.
In this case.
Although, I'm always a skeptic of there being such thing as absolute authenticity.
Yeah.
But I think there is relative authenticity. So you can like police the fuzzy borders and call things out that seem like blatant appropriation. And then it's on the people that are being called out to defend themselves. I'm honestly not about to proclaim Iggy Azalea on one side or the other of that coin, but I think it's interesting that people call her out, and I think it's interesting that she shuts them down. But it is an ethic that in underground hip hop culture, from what I've gleaned, faking an accent is a no-no.
Okay.
So like the British rappers that pretended to be American were derided by other British rappers who rapped in British accents because they were like, be yourself, keep it real. So I think that's like a strike against Iggy Azalea. I think if she was doing what she was doing but did it with an Australian accent, that would be more authentic.
That would be interesting to hear. I don't think I've heard Australian rap.
There's very good Australian rap. Yeah.
Okay. So one of the other elements of outside of that sort of peer review reception is the popular reception of you putting forward scientific ideas such as evolution in a country like America, where I guess there's a big difference in the reception that you get there compared to, say, in Western Europe or I guess in Canada as well, where they're like, oh, this is great, this is really interesting, as opposed to you're the devil, where is my burning cross?
Well, in a way, I feel like I kind of relocated to America and reoriented my focus there because that's where the need was. If I do a show about evolution in the UK, everyone's like rah rah Darwin, and if I go to the States, I mean, New York is a safe place to celebrate Darwin, but I have toured my Rap Guide to Evolution show around Texas and Alabama and Mississippi, and
And people come and buy tickets.
Yeah, they do, because there's sort of like pockets of rationalism in these places that are embattled, and they can't bring up Darwin with their friends without being told that Jesus loves them and the earth is 6,000 years old. And so they're very like excited by someone that's willing to stand on stage and shout creationism is dead wrong.
So what do you think the ripple effect is, that if it's the people who already agree with you who are coming, are you managing to reach the people who don't agree with you?
They bring their friends.
Oh,
So
okay.
when I do a gig in a red state, I'll have fans that come, and they'll have their like buddy or their brother-in-law or whatever that they, you know, have always had these arguments with in a friendly way. Come see this rapper, he's really good. And I, you know, the best response I get in those kinds of places is like, I don't believe in all that evolution stuff, but your show sure was funny. I enjoyed it a lot. You know, it's something to think about anyway. And you're like, all right, I'll
That's
take
like
that.
the door is open at least.
Yeah,
a little.
so this is, and you know, I'm also not up there like just gratuitously proclaiming truth and insulting falsehood. You know, I think it's much more effective to say, oh, you don't believe in evolution? Well, let me show you some really cool stuff that it explains in a really fascinating way.
Yeah.
Like, this will blow your mind. If you don't believe in evolution, it's on you to come up with a better explanation, but here's this one, and it predicts stuff that you never would have thought was true, but turns out to be true. So that's, you know, that I think that works better, and I think, you know, people that don't go into a show thinking they're down with Darwin are intrigued. You know, I think it's sort of win more flies with honey kind of mentality, but also hip hop is sort of intrinsically like combative, so you got to throw down as well. There's going to be some digs and some punchlines against the views that I'm there to debunk, but it's not just like rah rah rah, you're wrong.
Yeah, I mean, it's more play.
It's got to be
isn't it?
entertaining.
Yeah.
You know, it can't, I mean, it's not Rage Against the Machine. Rage Against the Machine is entertaining, but I don't know if a Rage Against the Machine approach to debunking pseudoscience would work that well.
I mean, people who are fans of it already in that case are probably going to be screaming along, but their friends, not so much.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm just wondering what that looks like from the stage. Can you tell who's brought the friend and who the friend is from the expressions when they're looking up at you?
Yeah, body language is part of it, and, you know, whether they walk out when I say certain things. I don't
That's
always
a sign.
keep them in the show till the end. But, you know, like what I've been doing for years now, which I really like actually, is that I build a Q&A into the show.
Yes.
So I tend to have a kind of show template, which is that I'm like making the case, and then I have a Q&A, and then I have like a freestyle segment after the Q&A. So then I get to actually hear from the audience. And if it's the climate change show, they'll be like, you know, what about sunspots if they're a climate skeptic, you know, or if they're creationists and I'm doing the evolution show, it's, you know, the fossil record's inconsistent, or, you know, there's just sort of talking points. And then that signals to people that think everyone agrees with them that there's still dissent out there, but it also gives me the opportunity to sort of address that objection and smack it down.
and to do the freestyling, so to sort of shift towards the neurology and consciousness sides of things. I was wondering about the freestyling itself. What does the neurology or the literature on the neurology and your own experience tell you about how you can freestyle to be able to deliver that? Because I think for most people it seems totally impossible, and I guess you have to work very hard at it. But if you hit that flow, how does that feel? How do you get there?
Well, it feels supernatural. And I have a unsubstantiated theory that people that are making a living in the arts are probably more likely to be religious or spiritual, because the improbability of making a living in the arts, given the odds, makes you feel like you're chosen, and the experience of creating art makes you feel like you're a vessel for a higher power. And I've felt like that. I was teaching myself to rap and freestyle since I was 19 and had, you know, non-specific spiritual leanings. Was not the disciple of any religion or church, but definitely felt like there was, you know, a divine presence and energy and kind of like new agey stuff. But I felt like when I was freestyling, I was like channeling the spirits, and I was like writing a lot of rhymes about that, actually, like the challenge of opening yourself as a vessel for the spirit world or the Godhead to speak through you in an authentic way and bring light to the world and all that kind of bullshit.
So now, what do you think still, like, in terms of there being a muse? You know, it's something that so many artists have kind of had tried to discuss when they seem troubled by its appearance or lack of appearance.
There's such a simple way to reconcile it. The subconscious is vast, and it's in your head, but you're not aware of it. And it can deliver things to you that your brain knows, but your conscious mind doesn't. So that's why once I sort of learned about how the psychology and neuroscience of the brain worked, I was like, well, that actually fits just as well with the experience of freestyling. It is coming from somewhere else. It's coming from a place in my brain other than the place in my brain that keeps track of things that were consciously generated by quote unquote me. But it's all in the brain. So that's what freestyle is really about. Now that I've sort of done my homework, is training the conscious mind to let the floodgates open up enough to have things stream out, and then like quickly sort them out. You're not saying everything you think, right? You have to like allow your mind to generate it. It's actually a very Darwinian process, but it's happening almost too quick to notice. But when you pay attention, you will hear your brain suggesting things to say that you're like, no, I'm not saying that. So then you're kind of like quickly selecting from variants. And when you stop paying attention to that, it feels like they're just being delivered to you by someone. But, I think it does seem like magic to people because it takes a lot of practice to do, but that's how magic shows seem too. You know?
And how does it feel when you're doing that? When you're in the midst of the freestyle?
It's a huge thrill. It's great. Depending on how the audience reacts. So when I first started freestyling, the fact of freestyling was enough to thrill me. Like, the words are coming and I don't know where from, and this is amazing. But whether the audience was having a great reaction to it or not was hit and miss. Sometimes it depended on the crowd. The fact of freestyling is still impressive to some people. To others, they want to hear a good freestyle.
They want a certain level.
So then, the challenge, but I've been doing it for, close to 20 years, and I still have to, like, pay attention. I mean, it's a weird mix of, like, letting your guard down and just getting into the flow state, and, like, not being lazy about what you say. You know what I mean? You have to let it bubble up and then not let it spill all over the place.
It sounds, well, first of all, it sounds like something sexual. Second of all, it sounds like an aspect of just trying to go through life where you're trying not to force things, allow things to unfold, but at the same time, you can't just sit there going, why isn't it happening yet?
Yeah, mindfulness is actually a really a good model for understanding how good freestyle works too, I think, actually. Because you have to... you have to like be focused but open. And also there's a degree to which when you've been doing it for a long time, you kind of do have like a catalog of rhymes. What you put in between them is always different, but at least I'm not going to be like, oh, I can't think of something that rhymes with that. I like always find a pivot onto something else. The challenge is making it present and like referencing things that will be familiar to people. Like fundamentally, freestyle is about the human instinct for cheater detection, which is an evolutionary discovery that people are hypersensitive to presentations of falsehoods that make them look good, and the sort of like the suspicion is that you're passing off a memorized rhyme as a freestyle, and so you have to do things that are immediate, reference what just happened or something that's visible to them, and that sort of like disarms that suspicion, and that's when people go, oh my god, this is awesome. And it's also where like objections to my credibility as a middle-class white rapper tend to fall by the wayside. Because I've done lots of freestyle battling and I can do it all. I can match wits with whoever, and so like, who's gonna say I lack credibility as a rapper? You want to say that to my face? Then let's battle.
I'm not gonna say that. I haven't been practicing. But so, why now have you moved into the realm of consciousness, which sounds like you weren't conscious before? Let's assume you were conscious before. I was invited along, and I was like, this sounds amazing. And it was amazing. And it wasn't just because of the performance, but the fact that it was so deeply informed by like the current debates about the nature of how we can even know we have a self, how we can know that there is anybody real outside of ourselves, and so on.
Most people would probably have a lot to say about consciousness, whether they've read anything scientific about it or not. It's one of those subjects that everyone's an expert on because we've all got it.
Yeah, it's troubling, isn't it?
And until you sort of discover that the things you think about your consciousness turn out to often be false, that optical illusions and blind spots and cognitive biases and these things can be revealed in laboratory experiments in a way that show us that what we think we're seeing and experiencing may be different than what we're actually seeing and experiencing, and that can be measured. And so, I think that's the interesting place to look at consciousness and what it is. Where is it deficient? And how is it different than what we think it is? And I was interested in consciousness as a concept since I was a teenager, but it was more in the like Deepak Chopra and Eckhart Tolle kind of like training your consciousness to be one with the universe and feel compassion for all beings, and
which are not bad goals.
No, I suppose they're not bad goals. I guess it just depends on what metaphors are employed in the service of those goals and how literally you take them.
Yeah.
So
like with religion.
Yes, totally. Interestingly, there is a part of it that's coming full circle, because I didn't really like bang on about mindfulness in my show, but I did actually include a lot of mindfulness references in like sort of bringing that back as something that the science of consciousness can validate. But I'm not trying to write a blank check to supernatural beliefs either, because I do think that like even the sort of innocuous belief that you have a soul and might have life after death can give cover to religious and spiritual beliefs that are perpetrating injustice and misogyny and homophobia and all kinds of things that religion gives cover to. So I've sort of like, I did an assessment of the landscape and decided that like promoting naturalism, of which atheism is a subset, is actually a public good. And I'm going to do that in all my shows to various degrees to sort of disabuse people of their what Dawkins would call a delusion, of their false beliefs, and also show them that once you let go of them, the picture is just as rosy, and a lot of everything that's worth caring about remains, and a lot of things that have been like confusing or setting people down less than compassionate paths tend to evaporate. So that's, that I'm not sure if that came across in my show, but I had an overall agenda of making people at least consider what it would be like to think of themselves as a physical conglomeration of elements, and not a being in a body, a supernatural being in a body.
It sounds like a sort of to me, it sounds like a lot of coming back to Buddhism and just letting go of these storylines and imposing your version of things onto the things. Because guess what? They're kind of there anyway, and what you bring to the table is up to you. And if you let go of it, suddenly you're a lot less tense and a lot freer. You sort of hinted a moment ago. You sort of full circling back towards a kind of. Are you letting go of the tension, perhaps, between you and the spirituality that?
Well, I think there's naturalized versions of spirituality that are totally worth celebrating, and I'm on board with that. Like, there's an author, Sam Harris, who wrote a book, Waking Up, which is all about, like, its subtitle is Spirituality Without Religion.
Yeah,
I'm not sure if I agreed with everything in the book, but I do think like more mindfulness is going to be a better world, and I haven't read it yet, but I've just been reading about Robert Wright's new book, which is called Why Buddhism is True.
Okay, I haven't seen that one.
His whole argument is, from the reviews I've read, is that no religious or spiritual practice is more in alignment with the fundamentals of human nature and the path to flourishing and compassion and happiness than the Buddhist philosophy. I don't consider myself a Buddhist, but I don't have many bones to pick with it. I think it's mostly right, and there's some demons and gods and reincarnation stuff that managed to, accrue.
There's a surprising
detritus.
amount about hell realms in Buddhism that I didn't know about till recently.
Different strains of Buddha. I mean, it happens with every philosophy, every religion. There tend to be like more fundamentalist versions of it, or just people are superstitious by nature. I think really like supernatural beliefs are the default mode. It takes work to rid yourself of them, but if you ask a child, they have like teleological explanations for everything.
Yeah.
Like the mountain is there for climbing, and the sheep is there for taking its wool, and they really like think of everything as having a purpose, and that purpose must have come from an intelligence, and they don't really have the tools to think about natural selection, which can create the appearance of intelligence without having had an intelligence that designed it.
It sounds like confabulation, where people don't remember why, if they have short-term memory problems, and you go, well, why is this here, or how did you get here? And they will tell you a story and genuinely believe it, but they really have just made it up out of nowhere.
Yep. Which, and I think this perspective also helps you be a lot more compassionate to religious people and to spiritualists, because, there's aspects of the new atheists and the sort of like anti-theist response to religion that actually rubbed me the wrong way. And I did a whole show, Rap Guide to Religion, and mostly it was written for atheists to sort of try to convince them that religion is not just ignorance and fear and stupidity. It is like a fundamental like orientation of human psychology that evolution has built into us that we're able to unlearn. But it's the default mode, and it's there for a reason, because it assisted in our survival and reproduction prospects in the past. So I'm very sympathetic actually to having spiritual beliefs. I just don't think they're true.
Yeah, I mean, that seems fair.
I do think they're natural, but not everything natural is good, and a lot of it I think is worth working against.
So in terms of human nature, when you're saying that Buddhism seems like it really gets a lot of things right about human nature, what do you think the core of human nature is? Good and bad?
Yeah, well, I think the core of human nature is what natural selection instilled in us to assist with our survival and reproduction prospects over our history. So, like, human nature is context dependent, but not arbitrary. So, if you're under threat, you're going to behave more aggressively, or curl up into a ball and do the opposite, in which case probably contribute fewer descendants to the future gene pools, and that's going to end up influencing human nature in the future. Human nature is changing based on the environmental context changing and what's being selected for changing. So I think one thing that inspires me about this view for the contemporary world is that a lot of things that used to be killers for us from a natural selection perspective, like infant mortality and infectious disease and things, are being dealt with by modern medicine. That doesn't mean evolution stops. It means the drivers of evolution change, and they're maybe going to move towards things like mate selection instincts. And I think comedy and humor and intelligence and conversationalism, those are all sexually selected instincts in us. So we might evolve via the drive to be attractive to become a more funny, intelligent, artistic species without having to worry about whether we're going to die every day.
So what counts as, so it's still about that attraction, but different things that fit into that picture. You don't just have to be the best hunter, the best warrior.
Yeah, there's pretty good evidence that shows that, like, if you're in a situation with poor health care, then women are more attracted to more like aggressive, dominant, alpha, masculine type guys. And if you're in a situation where your health care is taken care of, then they tend to be attracted to more like creative, artistic guys. So dealing with healthcare evolves the world towards greater compassion and creativity.
So like the fate of our sexual mating lives depends on the health system surviving, in part.
Ironically.
In Canada and the UK anyway.
Yeah, and it comes back to that thing we were talking before, like time horizons, right?
Yes.
If your time horizon is longer, you can invest in forms of competition that have positive externalities. And if your time horizon is shorter, you are prone to, I was going to say compelled to, but you can resist. You can resist those instincts. The instincts are human nature. You could say, like, I want to fucking punch this person in the face right now, because they disrespected me. That's human nature. It's also human nature to say, but I probably shouldn't.
Yeah.
And which of those wins out has a lot to do with the signals that you got from your environment as you were growing up.
And being able to practice and want to practice, being able to not just react in the moment and instead respond when you have that extra moment.
Sure. And I think the motive to practice mindful responses is something you can't take for granted either, right? So that sort of like broad perspective that gives you the tools to not be a slave to your instincts is one that not everyone has time for or inclination towards. So, I want to be careful not to just say, like, if only everyone was practicing mindfulness every day, all of the problems of deprivation and dog-eat-dog competition would disappear, because I think that's too big an ask. I think you actually have to, like, that's why I brought up healthcare. You like, do you get better healthcare from telling people to be more mindful, or do you get more mindfulness from just providing them with healthcare? I think it's the latter, actually.
That makes sense, because when people are just desperate at the point of just needing food, or they're just trying to get money for medication, where is the space to be thinking about others?
If I get sick, I'll go bankrupt, or someone will die.
With this scarcity mentality, which I think is in many ways part of the current, like, Western liberal culture, that people, I mean, this is where the arguments for universal basic income come in, right? That if you have those basic needs met, you have greater space in which to explore your potential and think about others and what you could contribute.
Although, I've, as someone who's lived in Canada and the U.S. and spent a lot of time in the U.K., I'm skeptical that there's really like a Western liberal culture. It's so different, like the U.S. doesn't have universal health care, and they're like at each other's throats with the guns.
Yeah, I should put my broad brush back in its pot. And
and then you could take like somewhere like Norway, which is doing way better than the UK in terms of social indicators and like alcoholism, but you've got the NHS here, so it's definitely ingredients, but it's like, it's pretty clear what the trend is, right? And the US in many ways is more like a third world country because of how enamored they are with laissez-faire trickle-down economics. They're like, it's worth it. It's worth it for the exceptional to rise to the top. It'd be job providers, all those people that fall by the wayside. It's just like casualties of the competition. It's just,
Does that seem more like evolution?
What's that?
Is that more like a certain kind of Darwinian evolution?
Yeah, well, ironically, the biggest proponents of free market capitalism are often creationists, but there's also like, proponents of social Darwinism in a way. But yeah, it is. It's a kind of evolution. But the thing is, like, evolution doesn't have a single outcome. It has the outcome of like wasps that sting caterpillars and leave an egg inside them to eat them from the inside out. Evolution can inflict maximum agony and not care at all. And it can also produce, self-sacrificing, compassionate behavior in other contexts.
And your new album.
Yeah, that's the cultural evolution of hip-hop, although I'm not going to presume to, be on the forefront of anything. Only time will tell, whether the new branch of evolution ends up going extinct or founding a new colony.
So one of the tracks that you performed in Edinburgh that I really resonated with was about taking mushrooms and going to an aquarium and talking to an octopus. And I wondered what your thoughts on psychedelics are in terms of understanding through experience, I guess, how the mind works, maybe alongside the science that is really kind of blowing up right now, beginning to learn more about what happens to the brain on psychedelics. But have they played a role for you in this exploration that comes out through your art?
Yeah, I think like foundationally. So I haven't done psychedelics in quite a long time. There was a period, let's say from age like 17 to 23 or 24, that it was really like, that was my thing that I liked. I would like do mushrooms and go to a dance party or go out with a bunch of friends in the woods or just have like existential conversations. And I was really, it was kind of my spirituality in a way. It was like a way of communing, whether with people or with art or with nature. So yeah, that like psychedelic trip to the aquarium isn't based on one specific experience. It's kind of a amalgamation of a few, but it was the kind of thing I liked to do when I was 20. There was a point at which I was like, I'm going to be a rapper, this is going to be my career. And the problem with it is that people stick a mic in your face when you're at a party.
Yes.
So there was a few times when I had taken some drugs and people were like, yo, the DJ has got a mic hooked up. We just told him you're the sick rapper. Go grab it. And I was like, I don't think I can do this right now. And then I would look back on that the next day and I'd be like, that was pathetic. I need to be ready. So I actually just like stopped doing any drugs out and like didn't smoke any. I used to smoke a lot of marijuana as well. And I was like, just didn't, it wasn't, you know, I didn't want that to be the reason this career path didn't work out, you know? And it's, unlike other jobs, rapper is one that's like initially met with skepticism, both from people and from other rappers. So people want you to like show them that you're a rapper right now, or they won't believe you. So for me, drugs was not compatible with that. But I feel like I learned a lot, and I do think there's some benefit to like exploring your psyche in that way, because I mean, every drug is different, right? Like cocaine turns you into an egotist, and the most interesting thing in the world is you, and you just want to tell everybody about it, which is not one I would really recommend for spiritual development.
No, not really. No, unless maybe you film it and play it back to yourself.
That's a good idea, actually. Yeah. Although, you know, would you really go there? Maybe you would, actually. Maybe you would just like tell the camera why you're so great.
Or if it was filmed secretly, you know, so some people, maybe if you need to intervene on a friend and show them themselves on coke, it could make a difference.
Yeah, it's a good idea. I hadn't thought about that. But I think other ones like mushrooms and DMT, ayahuasca, MDMA to a certain point, although that can become cocaine-like if you do enough of it. But
it's often because it's cut with amphetamines. You know,
what's that?
Well,
yeah, it's based on, that's what the M and T and MDMT stand for, right? Yeah, but mushrooms was my favorite because of its sort of like, it wasn't so extreme that it would. Well, it depends on how much you do, but it shows you things about your mind that you're not aware of. I think ayahuasca is pretty good for that as well, and LSD, but they're different in their tone, but there's definitely like things that you sort of confront or that bubble up or that you think about, like people that you want to tell things or think ways you want to spend your time, or just like realizations about your path in life from a macro perspective that come up, and you're like, how could I not think about this all the time? How have I not been thinking about this? Is so important. And it's funny, you come out of the trip and there's nothing interesting to tell anyone. You know what I mean? Like the thing that seems so profound when you're having a psychedelic experience generally just seems so bland when you're out of it, but you can put it to use in subtle ways.
I think that part of the difference is that it's an experiential, you experience that truth that maybe seemed obvious when you just speak it, but you didn't really feel it before. If you just say, oh, but love is the most important thing, that sounds very trite and superficial, but if you feel it, that's kind of a different ballpark.
And if you learn how to put that into practice, then you're the Dalai Lama.
Yeah, I mean, how many trips has the Dalai Lama had?
Well, I think there is something to meditation being the long road to a place that drugs are the short road to. And you take the short road, take the shortcut, you miss out on some of the scenery that might have been important to the experience.
Maybe the discipline as well.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. So I was very enamored, and then I got disenchanted, and now I'm sort of like starting to recognize. I still haven't gone back to them, but I've definitely gone back to them in terms of like just reading and being curious and not like being dismissive. And I read some of the research that song was based on. The science advisor of the show, Anil Seth, was one of the co-authors on, and David Nutt's former student, whose name is not going to come to me right now.
Robin Carhart Harris?
Yes, Robin Carhart Harris, yes. So it was him and Anil and several others, but they're giving LSD and mushrooms to people and then having them do the whole thing in an fMRI scanner, and they found this thing about temporal signal diversity, the sort of range and bandwidth and patterns of brain waves do actually get sort of elevated during the trip, and that definitely comports with my experience of it. So that whole song was about the integrated information theory, and the sort of linkages in the brain between parts and other parts that might be amplified by a psychedelic experience. Yeah. And, it's validating in a way to people that have been advocates of it for a long time, saying you will learn things about yourself. This will like activate parts of the mind. You will expand consciousness. It turns out not to just be a frivolous metaphor. It's like actually literally what happens in a way.
I wonder if you might also be getting a sense of this now you have a young child, that they're kind of like the tripping all the time, because it is those parts of the brain that as we grow up, they don't talk to each other so much, but it's a free-for-all in a young child's brain. And they compared, I think, fMRI scans of someone on LSD and children, and they're like, this looks similar. So we need to lock up all the kids because they're really dangerous.
Yeah, or put all the druggies into nursery school.
That could be fun.
Alison Gopnik is a researcher at Berkeley, and she's got a metaphor for that. She wrote a bunch of books about developmental psychology, and she talks about the lantern versus the spotlight of attention. So normal adults are having a spotlight of attention. Babies have a lantern. They're just taking in a wider range of everything. And, William James called it a blooming, buzzing confusion, which I sort of made a lyric out of. But that is, I think there is something to babies are like, the experience of babies is analogous to the experience of an adult on LSD. Like lights up opens the doors of perception. And it's also, I think at the neural level, they have trillions of more connections than adults, and learning is about pruning and like disregarding the ones that aren't really serving a purpose, but that can be part of the richness of their experience.
Yeah, I mean, it's letting in it's almost back to a creative process, that the more things that you can let in and kind of gestate, then the more things that can come out. But you could feel overwhelmed if that was in your conscious rather than your subconscious the whole time.
Yeah, and I have a 9-month-old who is probably just on a psychedelic trip at all times by his behavior. I also have a 3.5-year-old, and she's the one that's always like, Daddy, look, that looks just like a key, or that looks just like a, she's just like noticing resemblances and pointing things out. That she's just very like observant and mindful of her surroundings in terms of noticing things that are amazing. And, look at that, isn't that just like a? I'm like, oh yeah, that's very very astute of you. I was thinking about my next project, letting it all go by me without noticing. Yeah.
So what will be the next project? Is that still gestating?
Yeah. I have a hard time starting working on something without knowing where I'm going to perform it or what I'm going to do with it or what the you know what I mean? I really do envision, like for the Rap Guide to Consciousness, I was like, I'm taking it to the Brighton Fringe for 5 days. That's the beta test. Then I'm going to, the Edinburgh Fringe and doing the big production. So I kind of really like knew what it was going to be like to lay it down, and I'm writing with that in mind. But I think the next project's probably going to be about artificial intelligence and technology and the singularity. And I did a bit of that in the Rap Guide to Consciousness in terms of like what it could do, cognitive implants and neural lace and the sort of possibilities of machine-brain interface as a aspect of consciousness science, but it's going to change everything.
Are you as terrified as Sam Harris?
No. I'm more. I tend to be more sympathetic to Dan Dennett than Sam Harris wherever they clash, and agree with pretty much everything they agree with each other on. But Sam Harris, I'm not sure if I've really. I think I've just heard him say in a few podcasts and things like, I'm going to be working on this. He's like working on a book about it, right? But I
think that's right.
It's not out yet, but he's sort of like, he takes the threat very seriously. I think he read Nick Bostrom's Superintelligence, as did I. Amazing book. That would be the core of a Rap Guide to the singularity right there. But Dennett's thing in his most recent book was there's more urgent things to worry about than a superintelligence taking over the world. And he thinks the more urgent thing is that we're going to cede control to incompetent machine learning. And so people's instincts are to assume machines are smarter than they really are, and that we need to sort of like make sure they're not given too much responsibility because they're still going to be buggy and prone to screw up. And that we have to worry about that more than we have to worry about them taking over. that we need to like be careful not to overestimate their powers.
That makes them sound more human. The mid-level bureaucrats, the incompetent mid-level bureaucrats, are going to be the ones who try and launch Skynet.
Yeah. I think sort of trusting the AIs to take care of things that people are already pretty good at. I mean, I'm not a skeptic of self-driving cars at all. I can't wait for self-driving cars. People suck at driving, But when it comes to strategic decision making, or like vision crafting, planning the like arc of a project or of a city or a civilization, I think being a little too quick to give it over to the machines is not going to like make them our overlords. It's going to make things fall apart that people actually do pretty well.
I wonder what it would do to rap.
Yeah, well, I have a line in the show where I say the pinnacle will have machines rapping. Actually, nah, that'll never happen. I got the last job that'll go to computers. Peace to Apple, Amazon, Uber. Hey, I say the proof is in the pudding. Let's have a debate. Is improvement a good thing? I'll take the technology option. You can be the human team, and I'll be Watson with the implants. But I can't wait to hear a good machine learning rap program. But I think it's going to be one of the hardest things. I think rap, comedy, like I was going to say art, but some art's actually really easy for machines to do. They can already compose classical music, so I guess that means art, from an artistic perspective, rap is a much higher art form than classical music.
There, you heard it here, and now it's proved. Statement made. So to kind of draw things to a close here, I got a couple of questions. One that we'd like to ask the guests in general that we have on the show is, and you've mentioned a lot already, are there particular favorite books you have that you would like to recommend that really informed the art that you're making, or if people want to follow up on the kind of themes that we've been getting into here?
Yeah, well, I mentioned superintelligence. I'm not really making that art yet, but if I were, I think that's a seminal book on what AI is and what it could become. I think Steven Pinker's The Blank Slate, an extremely important corrective to a lot of assumptions about what human nature is and isn't. I thought Daniel Dennett's new book, Bacteria to Bach and Back Again, really excellent.
And great title.
Yeah. Well, I've seen some reviews say the unfortunately titled new book by Dan Dennett.
Well, I disagree with them.
Yeah, I think it's clever. And this one's a bit older, but Evolution for Everyone by David Sloan Wilson. Mm-hmm. That book pretty much was the foundation of my rap guide to evolution, because it ranges from bacteria to Bach and back again. It goes, from the evolution of multicellularity through to how societies either thrive or fail, and it even has this whole thing, like it was even his idea that gangster rap is in a way a kind of narration of how humans behave under deprived circumstances. Mm-hmm. And there's a whole chapter about that. It's really great. It's really great for sort of a brave foray into how evolution and human behavior can be understood to inform each other. So those would be good places to start.
Good choices.
Yeah.
I need to add them to my list immediately. And the last question really is, so as you know, the site we're doing this for is called High Existence. What would leading a high existence mean to you?
I'm gonna frame it in moral terms. Mm-hmm. So it's very natural for us to think about ourselves and our families and their well-being, and I think we're never going to escape from that completely. But I think higher existence is thinking about the well-being of a city or a country or the whole world, and trying to balance our decisions against the interests of the group. Mm-hmm. Balancing the individual's interests against the interests of the group, not being naive about people like self-sacrificing without compensation or without reciprocity. I think there's a real problem with a lot of environmentalism, particularly relying on just naked altruism as its proposed solution. Mm-hmm. I don't think that's actually a starter. I think people need to see other people doing it for them to not feel like a sucker.
Yeah.
In which case, that's where regulations and pollution taxes and things become necessary. But that's why you should support regulations and pollution taxes, because you're agreeing to make a sacrifice along with everyone else for everyone's benefit. So thinking about everyone's benefit while not being naive about what people will and won't put up with, to me, then you're living a high existence.
It's like back to the idea of rap, that it's about the content, and as well as it's not just the content, it's the way in which you get across. If you need to connect to people if you're going to ask them to come with you anywhere.
Yeah.
And to take that into account.
If you want to make educational entertainment, you better put the entertainment first.
Yes, or I'm not buying a ticket. It has to be Rap Guide 2 first.
Yeah.
So if people want to check out your work, see where you're performing live and grab some of your albums, where should they go?
The simplest place would be music.bababrinkman.com, and that's BABABRINKMAN, and all my albums are there. Some of them are pay what you like, and they're all cheaper than on iTunes, but they're also all on iTunes.
Yeah. So people find it that way. We'll put all links and so on in the show notes, and we should have a couple of songs from the new album included in the podcast. So, I mean, I think we've given people a lot here. I think we've covered consciousness, the history of rap music, culture, personal development, spirituality, and all on only one cup of tea.
Yeah, done deal. Let's call it a day. And we're even sitting under a blue sky now. So
it's the schizophrenic weather of London. So thank you so much for coming on the show, and thank you so much for sharing your thoughts and your experiences. Until next time down the road.
My pleasure. I enjoyed it a lot. Thank you.
Conversation with the cephalopod sipping on psilocybin. We integrated information. A skeptic would call it anthropomorphizing. Just a bloody reductivist busting the bubble of a panpsychic. But I swear to God that octopus was conscious, y'all. We was vibing. Damn, look at those eyes, look at those legs, baby. Tell me, what is you thinking? People call me Baba Brinkman, and I'm tripping from this mushroom tea I'm sipping. Who am I? Just another Homo sapien. We're the last in a long line of hominids, and it's been a long time since one of us had a common ancestor with an octopus. Look at you, you're a living alien. I'm like Amy Adams in Arrival, not as attractive, but just as passionate about the planet's survival. And I wanna know, how can you be so good at problem solving and camouflaging when your brain is small, but your semi-autonomous arms have 2/3 of all your neurons? And it's like that theory of consciousness called integrated information that says any system is conscious if it's connected up and differentiated. It's got that mathematical figure called phi that's quantifiably calculated as a measure of how much the whole is greater than the sum of the parts when they're isolated. You probably couldn't calculate it yourself. I mean, you've only got 8 legs, but it's kind of a measurement of redundancy, like the compression that makes JPEGs. And you understand compression, don't you? Yeah, you can fit through soda bottle heads. No bones about it, just viscous organs, tentacles, and a little bit of cartilage.
In your eyes I'm drowning. I'm stuck on you. Wrap your arms around me. I'm a sucker for you. I like your fire, baby. There's not much time left. Be myself.
The thing is, if this theory is right, and I can't say if it's right cause I'm tripping hard, but if it's right, there might be something it's like to be an octopus's arm. Some kind of subjective tentacle perspective, a mind that you would have 9 of. And when you swim in a straight line, I guess those minds would line up and you would combine them. You must think I'm a serious hippie, but it's not me, this theory is trippy. It's got multi-dimensional crystals distilling experiences mysteriously. And phi is uncalculatable, I mean incalculable, unrelatable. Even a worm has a phi of 10 to the power of 468 or so. So what kind of phi do you and I get? This whole theory is panpsychic. Is the universe really conscious, or is it just the psilocybin that I did? I'm trying to stay open-minded. Consciousness is unified and can't be divided, but when I'm high, the temporal signal diversity gets elevated inside it. Check out the magnetoencephalographic charts, my signal is off. My uncompressible thoughts got me tripping and talking to cephalopods. I had to go home and sleep it off. Later I came back to see my 8-legged friend, and the aquarium staff told me that she already laid eggs and was dead. But I still had a conversation with the cephalopod, sipping on psilocybin. We integrated information. A skeptic would call it anthropomorphizing. Just a bloody reductivist busting the bubble of a panpsychic. But I swear to God, even his arms were conscious, y'all. We was vibing.
In your eyes I'm drowning. I'm stuck on you. Wrap your arms around me. I'm a sucker for you. I like your fire, baby. There's not much time left. Be myself for the fire while I'm still conscious. Be myself for the fire while I'm still conscious.
Thanks for listening. If you appreciate the High Existence podcast, the best way to support it is to invest in yourself by acquiring one or more of our self-development tools at store.highexistence.com. Use the code WISDOM at checkout to get a huge 25% off the 30 Challenges to Enlightenment course. You can also leave reviews on iTunes or share it with your friends on social media. Thank you so much for tuning in, and cheers to a high existence.